Flip through old home videos from a 1970s neighborhood block party or a Union Hall gathering, and something registers before you can name it. People look happy, not because life was easy. Inflation was brutal. The Vietnam War had just ended. Watergate had shaken the country to its foundations. And yet, according to the General Social Survey, which has tracked American happiness since 1972, roughly 34% of Americans reported being very happy during that decade. Today, that number has fallen to 23%. Those reporting sadness rose to nearly 21%. The net difference between happy and unhappy Americans, once a comfortable 22 points, has collapsed to less than 3 points. Americans were not happier in the 1970s because they were more grateful, more resilient, or more spiritually evolved. They lived inside a completely different psychological and social architecture. The contentment was not chosen, it was structural, built into the texture of daily life through affordable housing, dense communities, trusted institutions, and an economy that had not yet weaponized attention itself. This was not virtue, it was environment. Start with the foundation that makes everything else possible, the sense that life is moving forward. In 1975, the median family income was $13,719. The median price of a new home was $39,000. That meant a family's annual earnings represented 35% of a home's total value. The math worked. Home ownership, the central milestone of American adult life, was achievable on a single income within a reasonable timeline. By 2025, median family income had risen to $108,600, but the median home price had climbed to $410,800, nearly 8 times that income. In 1985, a home cost roughly 3.5 times the average annual salary. Today, that ratio sits at 7.14. This is not an abstraction. When a milestone that once required 4 years of saving now requires decades. The psychological effect is corrosive. Modern Americans are not struggling to acquire luxuries. They are struggling to reach the starting line of adulthood that their parents cleared without thinking hard about it. That gap between expectation and reality produces a chronic, low-grade despair that simply did not exist in the same structural way in the 1970s. The dream was not a slogan then, it was a statistical reality. But economics alone does not explain it. Something equally important was happening in the texture of daily social life. In the 1970s, American communities were dense with what sociologists call third places, the diners, barbershops, bowling alleys, union halls, and library reading rooms that existed between home and work. These were not remarkable destinations. They were just where life happened. They were where you ran into your neighbor, argued about the game, or met someone new without trying. Those places are largely gone now. Urban planning prioritized cars and privatization. Strip malls replaced town centers. Drive-thrus replaced counters. In rural communities especially, the collapse of third-place infrastructure has been catastrophic and largely invisible. People still live near each other, but the architecture that once forced casual human contact has been dismantled so thoroughly that proximity no longer produces connection. The consequences are visible in the numbers. In 1960, 13% of American households were single-person. Today, nearly 30% of Americans live alone. Young Americans in 2024 spend just 5 hours a week with friends, a 60% collapse from the 13 hours recorded as recently as 2010. 1/4 of American adults report having no one to turn to for emotional support. Loneliness at these levels carries a mortality risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. In the 1970s, this epidemic had not arrived because the infrastructure that prevented it was still intact. Loneliness expanded into a vacuum left by something else that had quietly held American psychology together: trust. In 1972, 68% of Americans expressed trust in the mass media. Not agreement, trust. A shared confidence that somewhere a common version of reality existed. Trust in the federal government had once peaked at 73%. Even by the early 1970s, after Vietnam and Watergate had eroded it significantly, it still sat at 25%, fragile but functional. Today, media trust stands at 28% overall and just 8% among Republicans. Trust in the federal government hovers around 22%. The medical system, once trusted by 80% of Americans in 1975, is now trusted by 36%. Banks, public schools, organized religion, every institution that once provided a sense of order and shared purpose have collapsed to roughly a third of their former standing. The psychological cost of this is hard to overstate. Institutional trust is not just about politics. It is the background radiation of daily life. It is the quiet confidence that systems are real, that problems are solvable, that tomorrow will resemble today in predictable ways. When that trust exists, it does not feel like anything. When it collapses, life becomes a constant low-level emergency. Americans in 2026 are not just mistrustful of government, they are living without the psychological scaffolding that trust once silently provided. That scaffolding was also destroyed by something no one in the 1970s could have predicted: the digital attention economy. When the television station signed off with the national anthem and cut to static, the day ended. There was nothing pulling at your attention after 11 o'clock at night. Boredom was an available state. When children were bored, they went outside. When adults were bored, they talked to whoever was nearby. The absence of infinite stimulation was not deprivation. It was, in retrospect, protection. Today, the average American carries in their pocket a device engineered by some of the most sophisticated behavioral scientists in history, running algorithms specifically designed to make disengagement feel unbearable. This is not metaphor. Neuroimaging studies from 2025 show that heavy social media use correlates with measurable reductions in gray matter in the region of the brain governing impulse control. The physiological effects mirror what researchers find in substance use disorders. The 1970s had no such mechanism operating at scale. The mental reserves that now drain away before noon were once available for actual living. The young have paid the steepest price. The World Happiness Report of 2026 found that youth happiness rose in 8 out of 10 global regions over the last 2 decades. In the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, the English-speaking nations most saturated by algorithmic social media, youth happiness fell sharply. A generation that came of age during peak social media adoption is measurably less happy than any generation before it. Not because young people have less, but because the thing now competing for their attention was specifically designed to make real life feel insufficient. Then there is what happened to work. In the 1970s, when an employee left the office, they left work. The physical separation was absolute. There were no work emails to check at dinner. No Slack messages arriving at midnight. No expectation that flexible meant being perpetually available. The boundary between professional and personal life held, simply because the technology to breach it did not exist. Today, 55% of American workers say being always on is the norm at their company. More than half check work email during time off. Burnout has reached a 7-year high, with 72% of employees reporting moderate to very high stress. Among those aged 18 to 26, the figure reaches 74%. Remote workers, sold flexibility as a benefit, actually report higher burnout than in-person workers. Because when the office follows you home, there is no home to return to. A worker in the 1970s clocked out and became a person again. The modern worker never fully does. And over all of this sits a political climate that has converted disagreement into emergency. Americans in 2026 consistently report that politics generates sadness, frustration, worry, and anger as chronic emotional states. A September 2025 study found that Americans overestimate how much their political opponents support violence by as much as 442%. The conflict feels existential because it has been framed that way, relentlessly, by media systems that profit from the perception of permanent crisis. In the 1970s, political opponents largely shared a common information ecosystem. Disagreement was real. But the mutual delegitimization that now passes for normal public life, where the other side is not just wrong but dangerous, not just misguided but malicious, had not been architecturally installed yet. All of these forces, the unaffordable homes, the vanished third places, the collapsed trust, the attention economy, the always-on workplace, the weaponized politics, every single one points the same direction. Americans in the 1970s were not trying to be happy. They were living inside structures that made contentment the default. Housing was reachable. Communities had places to gather. Institutions felt real. The day had edges. Work ended. Attention was your own. Today, we have inverted nearly all of it. We built an environment where social isolation is the path of least resistance, where distrust is rational, where the phone in your pocket is the world's most sophisticated unhappiness machine, and where the financial milestones that once marked a stable adult life have been priced out of reach for the majority of the population. This is not about nostalgia. It is not about a simpler time. It is about recognizing that happiness was never really personal in the first place. It was always environmental. The faces in those 1970s home videos are not happy because those people were better at being human. They are happy because everything around them was structured to allow it. The faces changed because the structure changed first.